Before there was Japan, there was nothing. Not the nothing of an empty room, or the nothing of a field in winter, or the nothing of the space between stars. This was a different kind of nothing, a nothing that had not yet decided what it wanted to be, a nothing that was still, in some sense, everything, all the possibilities of the world, held together in a state before choosing, before shape, before the distinction, between above and below, between light and dark, between the thing that breathes and the thing that does not. The ancient people of Japan called this state the age before heaven and earth were separated. They described it as something like an egg, not a chicken's egg, small and ordinary, something vast beyond imagining, the entire universe contained in a single form, warm and dense and rotating very slowly, the heaviest parts sinking, the lightest parts rising, until the rising could no longer be contained, and the egg cracked open, and the world began. What rose became the sky, what sank became the earth, and in the space between, in the thin and luminous air that separated the high from the low, something came into being that had not existed before. The first to exist was Okuninushi. The name means the Lord of the august center of heaven. He was not born. He simply came into being, the way certain things come into being, not through cause and effect, but through the simple fact that the universe had reached a point where such a thing was necessary, where the space required someone to occupy it, and so someone did. He was alone. There was no one else yet. He existed in the center of the new sky, in the first moment of what would become the long story of the world, and then he became hidden. This is how the Kojiki describes many of the first gods. They came into being, they existed, and then they became hidden, their presence embedded in the structure of the world, rather than in any continuing story, the way the foundations of a building are not visible in the finished house, but are present in every room of it, holding everything up. After Okuninushi came Takamimusubi, the High Creator, and after Takamimusubi came Kamimusubi, the Divine Creator. These two existed in the high plane of heaven, Takamagahara, the place above all other places, the place where the gods live, when they live anywhere at all. They too became hidden. Their work was not the work of action and story. Their work was the work of possibility, of making the world the kind of place where other things could happen. Then came two more, Umashiya Shikabihikozi, whose name means something like the Lord of the pleasant reed shoots, the God of the first green things, pushing up through the mud of the newly formed earth, and Amenotokotachi, the eternal heavenly stand, the god of the stability of heaven itself, the one who makes sure that what is above stays above and does not come crashing down. These the five separate heavenly gods, the Kotoa Matsukami, existed before the world had its present form. They were the world's intention, its direction, the shape it was moving toward, before it arrived, and then they were hidden. After the five separate heavenly gods came 7 generations of paired gods, male and female together, the world learning how to exist in 2 forms at once, how to be one thing. That is also 2 things, the beginning of the pattern that would run through everything that came after. The names of these gods are long and difficult, and they carry in them the entire vocabulary of the early Japanese world, words for earth and sky and water and growth, for the things that stand and the things that flow, for the things that resist and the things that yield. Most of them are mentioned only once, their names spoken into the record, and then allowed to be quiet, their function completed by the simple fact of their existence. But the last of the 7 generations were different. The last of the 7 generations were 2 gods, whose names would be spoken for as long as Japan has had a language to speak them in. The last 2 were Izanagi and Izanami, the man who invites and the woman who invites, or perhaps the male one who calls and the female one who calls. The exact meaning is disputed, in the way that the meaning of very old words is always disputed, the original sense worn smooth by 1,000 years of use, but the feeling of the names is clear. These are 2 beings who reach toward each other, 2 beings who call out into the space between them, 2 beings for whom the world is not complete until it is shared. They stood on the floating bridge of heaven. This bridge is called Amanuki Hashi in the old language, the heavenly floating bridge, and it hung between the sky and the sea below, not anchored to anything, simply floating the way a thought floats, between sleeping and waking, present but not fixed, existing in the space between one state and another. Below the bridge, the earth was not yet the earth. It was a soup, a thick, chaotic, drifting soup, like oil floating on water, like the sea before the sea has decided what the sea should be. Jellyfish-like, the old text says, drifting and formless, waiting. The gods of the high plane of heaven had given Izanagi and Izanami a task. They had given them the jeweled spear of heaven, Amenonu Hoko, a spear whose tip was hung with jewels. That caught the light of the new sky and threw it back in colors that had no names yet. They had told the 2 gods to go to the floating bridge and to stir the chaos below them, to take the formless soup of the not yet earth and give it form. And so Izanagi and Izanami stood on the floating bridge, side by side, and lowered the jeweled spear into the sea below. They stirred. The sound the old text uses for this stirring is korokoro, a round, tumbling sound, the sound of something that rolls and tumbles and goes on rolling. They stirred the sea with the spear, and the sea churned, and the jewels caught the light, and the sound of it was korokoro, korokoro, like distant thunder, like a river going over stones, like the world deciding to begin. And then they lifted the spear, and from the tip of the spear, as they raised it out of the churning sea, drops of brine fell, not ordinary drops, not the drops that fall from a fishing pole or from an oar lifted from the water. These drops were the first solid thing, the first thing that was not soup, not formless, not waiting. They fell from the spear, and they piled up, and they hardened, and they became an island. This was Onogorozima, the self-curdling island. The island that came into being by its own nature from the weight of the brine, and the motion of the spear, and the will of the two gods, who had been sent to make it so. It was not yet Japan. It was not any of the islands that would follow. It was the first island, the starting place, the point from which everything else would measure its distance. Izanagi and Izanami looked down at it from the floating bridge above. Then they descended. They stepped off the bridge and down onto the new island, the first land that any being had ever stood on, the first solid ground in all the world. On Onogorojima, the two gods raised a great pillar. The text calls it the Pillar of Heaven, and it stood at the center of the island, the way all great pillars stand at the center of what they mark, the way the trunk of a very old tree stands at the center of its own rings. Around this pillar, Izanagi and Izanami would walk, each from a different direction, until they met on the other side, and the world could begin in earnest. But before that, before the walking, before the meeting, there was a question. Izanagi asked Izanami about her body. The question in the old text is direct, in the way that very old texts are sometimes direct, in ways that later texts learn to soften or avoid. He asked her where her body was not yet finished, where there was a place that was still forming, still incomplete, and Izanami answered honestly, the way she answered everything. She said that her body had grown, and formed, and come to itself, but there was one place where the forming was not finished. And Izanagi said that his body too had grown, and formed, and come to itself, but there was one place where there was something extra, something formed beyond what was needed, and he said, "Let me use what is extra in my body." to fill what is not yet finished in yours, and from this let us make the countries." Izanami said yes, and so they walked around the pillar of heaven, each from a different direction, Izanagi from the left, and Izanami from the right, walking slowly around the great pillar, in the new light of the new world, until they met. When they met, Izanami spoke first. She said, "What a lovely young man." And Izanagi said, "What a lovely young woman." But something was wrong. The children they made from this first meeting were not the children they wanted. The first was Hiruko, the leech child, boneless and soft, a child that could not stand, a child that drifted, the way the world had drifted. Before the spear stirred it, they put Hiruko in a boat of reeds and sent it out to sea. The text does not say what became of Hiruko after. The second was Awashima, the Pale Island, the Foam Island, also counted as not good. They did not understand why. They returned to the high plane of heaven and asked the gods there what had gone wrong. The gods consulted. They used the bones of a deer and the wood of a cherry tree and the movements of fire to read what the error had been, and they determined that the error was the speaking. When the two gods had walked around the pillar and met, it was the woman who had spoken first, and the woman was not supposed to speak first. The man was supposed to speak first. This is how it is explained in the Kojiki, without further commentary. In the matter-of-fact way the Kojiki explains many things that later readers have found troubling. Izanagi and Izanami returned to Onogorojima. They walked around the pillar again, each from their direction, until they met on the other side. This time Izanagi spoke first. He said, "What a lovely young woman." And Izanami said, "What a lovely young man." And the world became possible. Part 2. The Birth of the Islands. The islands of Japan were not made, they were born. This is the understanding that runs through the oldest layer of Japanese thought, the understanding that the land is not a thing constructed or arranged, but a living thing, something that grew from what came before it, something connected by blood and breath to the gods who made it, and the gods who live in it, and the people who have walked its paths. For as long as there have been people to walk, the Kojiki uses the same word for the creation of the islands that it uses for the birth of children, to give birth to produce. Izanagi and Izanami did not build Japan. They gave birth to it. The first island they produced was Awaji. In the old texts it is called Awazi no Hono Sawakeshima, the island of Awaji, long and narrow, lying between the mainland and Shikoku, like a hand reaching across a gap. It is still there. You can visit it. You can stand on its shores and look out at the same water that surrounded it when it was the first thing that had ever been called an island, when the word island was new and the world was still learning what it meant to have solid ground surrounded by water. The second island they produced was Iyo, which is now called Shikoku, the four-country island, the island with four faces. The Kojiki says this island had one body, but four faces, and each face had its own name, and each name was the name of a country within the island, a region, a place with its own character and its own relationship to the sea around it. This is how the Kojiki thinks about islands, not as undifferentiated land, but as personalities, beings with faces, things that can be known. Then came the island of Oki, hidden in the sea to the northwest, old and remote, a place that has always been a little separate from the rest, a little further from everything, as if it arrived knowing it would spend its life at a certain distance. Then came Tsukushi, which is Kyushu now, the great island to the southwest, also with four faces, also with four names, each face turned toward a different part of the sea that surrounds it. One face looked toward the open ocean, one face looked toward the mountains, one face looked toward the strait that separates it from the mainland. One face looked toward the islands to the south, the chain that trails away toward the horizon. Then came Iki and Tsushima, small islands between the mainland and the continent, stepping stones across the sea, places that have always mattered, more than their size suggests, because position matters, and these islands were positioned exactly where the world needed them. Then came Sado, the island of sadness, or so the name is sometimes interpreted, the island where exiles were sent in later centuries, the island that accumulated history, the way certain places accumulate it, drawing to themselves the weight of what happened there. But in the beginning it was simply an island, new and unnamed and full of possibilities that had not yet become stories. And then came the great island Uyamato Toyowakidushima, the great Yamato abundant dragonfly island, which is what is now called Honshu, the largest of all the islands, the one that holds within it the mountains and the rivers and the plains and the forests and all the places where the story of Japan would most famously be told. The dragonfly is part of the name. This is not accidental. The dragonfly has been a symbol of Japan for as long as Japan has been called anything. There is a story that the Emperor Jimmu, the first human emperor, climbed a mountain and looked down at the shape of the land below him and said it looked like dragonflies mating, twisting together, and from that day, the island was called the Dragonfly Island. Whether that story came before the name or after it is difficult to say, but the dragonfly is in the name, in the oldest name, the one given before there was a Japan, to give names to things. These 8 islands together are called Uyashimakuni, the Great 8-Island Country. This was the original Japan. The Japan before Japan knew it was Japan, the land that came into being when Izanagi and Izanami walked around the pillar and the world became possible. But they were not finished. They continued. They produced 6 more islands, smaller, tucked into the spaces between the larger ones. Islands that fill the geography, the way details fill a painting, completing it, making it the thing it is, rather than the sketch of the thing it could be. The Child Island of Kibi, the Lentil Island, the Large Island, the Woman Island, the Chica Island, the Twin Child Island. 6 more after the 8, 14 in total. The islands of Japan born one by one from the bodies of 2 gods who stood on the floating bridge of heaven and were asked to make a country. When the islands were finished, Izanagi and Izanami turned to the gods. The islands needed gods. Every mountain needed a god. Every river needed a god. Every sea and wind and tree and rock needed a spirit to inhabit it, a presence to give it character, to make it the particular thing it was, rather than merely a feature of the landscape. And so the 2 gods began to produce again. They produced Ukutushio, the god of the great harbor, the god of the sea crossing. They produced Iwatsuchibiko, the god of the rocks, the god of the things that do not move. They produced Iwasubime, the goddess of the spaces in the rocks, the goddess of the shadows and the small places. They produced Utohiwake, the god of the gates, the god of the openings, through which things pass from one world to another. They produced Amenohukyo, the god of wind, the god of the breath that moves across the water and makes the surface of the sea into something alive. They produced Oyabiko, the great field spirit, the god of the plains, and the crops that grow in them. Each god had a name. Each name carried a meaning. Each meaning was a description of a thing in the world that needed a presence, a guardian, something to inhabit it and give it its character. The Kojiki lists them carefully, name after name after name, the genealogy of the world's inner life, the roll call of the spirits that make Japan what it is. Some of these gods produced more gods between them. Iwatsuchibiko and Iwasubime produced 8 more between them. Uyamatsumi and Kayanohime produced 8 more. Some of them, 49 in total, the world filling up with presences, with spirits, with the particular living quality that makes Japan the kind of place where the mountain is not just a mountain, but a place where something lives, where the river is not just water, but a being with a name and a history, where even the stone by the road might be looking back at you. And then came the fire god. His name was Kagutsuchi, the shining prince of fire, and he was born last after all the other gods, after the sea gods and the mountain gods, and the gods of wind and stone and water. He was born last, and his birth was the end of Izanami. Fire is what it is. It does not know it is dangerous. It does not mean to harm. It simply is what it is, the most honest thing in the world, the thing that cannot pretend to be other than what it is. When Kagutsuchi was born, he burned. He burned his mother as he came into the world. He burned her body, the way fire burns everything it touches, without malice, without understanding, simply because fire and flesh are not compatible, because fire does what it does, and that is all. Izanami fell ill. She lay down on the earth of Onogoro-zima, and the earth where she lay became sacred, became different from other earth, the way places where something important has happened are always different from other places, holding something of what occurred there, in their soil and their air. As she lay there, even in her illness, even in her dying, she produced more gods. From her vomit came 2 gods of food, gods of nourishment, the gods of the things that keep life going, even when life is ending. From her body as it failed, came the gods of clay and the gods of water, the gods that are born from the meeting of earth and moisture, the gods of the fertile and the sustaining. Even dying, she gave birth. Even at the end of herself, she was still making things. And then Izanami died. She died on Onogoro-zima, in the new world they had made together, surrounded by the islands she had helped to birth, and the gods she had helped to produce, surrounded by the entire world, as it existed in that moment, which was entirely the result of what she and Izanagi had done together, walking around the pillar, speaking the words in the right order, lowering the jeweled spear into the sea. She died, and Izanagi was alone. He wept. The Kojiki is specific about this. It says that he wept, that his crying reached from the top of the head of the dead god to her chest, and from that crying came a god, Nakisawame, the weeping woman, born from grief itself, from the sound of a god who had lost the one he had made the world with. Then he killed Kagutsuchi, the fire god who had caused it, the fire god who had burned his mother as he was born. Izanagi killed him with the sword he wore at his side, the 10-grasp sword, the sword that takes 2 hands to hold and from the killing came more gods. Gods born from the blood of the fire god, gods born from the way the blood flew and fell on the rocks, and the rocks were changed by what fell on them. This is how it goes in the Kojiki. Even from destruction, more things are born. Even from grief and violence, even from the death of a god, and the killing of the god who caused it, the world fills up with more presences, more spirits, more of the particular life. That gives everything its name. But Izanagi was not done with his grief. He was not ready to accept that the one he had made the world with was simply gone. He went to find her. Part 3. The Land of the Dead. There is a place beneath the world called Yomi. The name is old, older than most Japanese words, and its meaning has been debated for as long as scholars have studied it. Some say it means the dark land. Some say it means the place beneath the earth. Some say the word is connected to the word for night, the word for the darkness that comes when the sun goes down and the world becomes something other than what it is in the day. Whatever its etymology, its character is clear. Yomi is the place where the dead go. It is not a place of punishment. It is not a place of reward. It is simply the place where things go when they are finished with the world above, when the thread of their life has run all the way to its end, and the world above no longer has a place for them. Yomi is underground. It is dark there. It is not cold exactly, but the warmth that things have when they are living is absent there, and the absence of that warmth gives the place a quality that feels like cold even when it is not. The dead in Yomi are not suffering. They are not happy either. They are simply there, existing in the way that things exist, when they are no longer quite themselves, when the particular force that made them, the individual thing they were, has quieted down, and they have become something more like the general state of having been than the specific state of being. Izanagi followed his wife there. He had not been asked to go. There was no instruction, no command from the gods of the high plane of heaven, telling him to descend into the land of the dead and speak to his wife. He simply went, the way people go to places they know they should not go, but cannot stop themselves from going because the person they love is there, and that fact overwhelms every other consideration. The entrance to Yomi is called Yomotsu Hirasaka, the even slope of Yomi, a long and gradual descent from the world of light into the world below. Izanagi walked it in the dark. He had no light. There is no light in Yomi, or rather, the light there is different from the light above, a gray, diffuse light, That makes everything equally visible and equally unclear. That shows you where you are, without telling you anything about it. He called his wife's name. He called Izanami into the darkness of the land of the dead, and his voice went ahead of him into a place no living god had been before. She came, or rather, he heard her. The text is careful about what he saw and what he heard. In Yomi, things are not quite as present as they are in the world above. Izanami came to the gates of the hall where she had been staying since her death, and she spoke to him from behind the gate. She said she was glad he had come. She said it in the way someone says it, when they mean it, and also know that it is more complicated than gladness. She said that he had come too late. She said that she had already eaten the food of Yomi, the food that ties you to the place, the food that makes you of this world, rather than of the world above. This is a rule that appears in mythologies all around the world, the rule that if you eat in the land of the dead, you belong to the land of the dead. It is as if the food of that place contains the place itself, as if eating there means taking the land of the dead into your body, and so becoming it, so that you can no longer simply leave. Izanami had not meant to eat, but she had been there for some time before Izanagi arrived, and the body, even the divine body, needs food, and the only food there was the food of Yomi. She said she would ask the gods of Yomi if she could leave. She said she would try. She said he must not look at her. Whatever happened, however long it took, however curious he became, he must not light a light and look at her in the darkness of Yomi. Izanagi agreed. He waited. The waiting was long. The Kojiki does not specify how long. Time in Yomi is not the same as time above. In Yomi, there is no sun to mark the hours, no season changing to mark the months. There is only the gray light, and the silence, and the particular quality of a place that is full of what has ended. Izanagi waited, and waited. And then he could not wait any more. He broke off one of the teeth from the left side of his hair comb, the comb he wore in his hair, and he set the tooth alight. In the old world, a tooth of a hair comb was a source of fire. This is how you made light when you needed light and had nothing else. He broke the tooth from the comb and lit it and held it up, and he saw his wife. What he saw cannot be described in the way that ordinary things are described. The Kojiki describes it carefully, respectfully, with the seriousness of something that happened and must be recorded, even though the recording is difficult. Izanami was no longer as she had been. Her body, which had been the body that made the world, which had walked around the pillar of heaven, and spoken the words, and produced the islands and the gods, was now something else. It was rotting. The gods of thunder, 8 of them, lived in the different parts of her body, taking up residence there, the way things take up residence, in places that have become available, in places that are no longer fully occupied by what occupied them before. Izanagi was afraid. The Kojiki says this simply. He was afraid, and he ran. This is one of the moments in the Kojiki that has been discussed for centuries. The moment when the god who made the world ran from the sight of his dead wife. Some readers have found it unforgivable. Some have found it deeply human. Some have found it both. What is certain is that he ran, and that Izanami, when she knew he had looked, when she knew he had broken his promise, was furious. She was furious in the particular way that people are furious when they have been seen in their most vulnerable state, in the state they specifically asked not to be seen in, when the person they most trusted has seen exactly what they most feared to be seen. She sent the ugly women of Yomi after him, the Shikome, the servants of the land of the dead, 8 of them, then 1,500 warriors of Yomi, all of them pursuing Izanagi, up the long slope from the land of the dead, toward the world of light. Izanagi ran. He pulled the black vine band from his hair and threw it behind him, and it became a cluster of grapes, and the pursuing women stopped to eat them. He pulled a comb from his hair and threw it behind him, and it became bamboo shoots, and the pursuers stopped to eat them. Even in flight, even terrified, he was making things. Even running, his hands reached back and transformed what they touched into something that could stop the pursuit. But the 8 gods of thunder were not slowed by grapes or bamboo. They continued. They came close. Izanagi reached the slope. He reached the place where Yomotsu Hirasaka begins, the long slope that leads from below to above, and he pulled 3 peaches from the peach tree that grew there, and threw them at the gods of thunder, and the gods of thunder stopped. 3 peaches, the fruit of the peach tree that grows at the border between the world of the living and the world of the dead, the fruit that has been, ever since this moment, the fruit that drives away evil, the fruit that the gods of death cannot approach, the fruit that appears in Japanese life whenever something needs to be protected from what should not be there. Izanagi spoke to the peaches before he left the border. He thanked them. He told them that, just as they had helped him in his time of need, they should go on helping the living people of the land whenever those people were in difficulty. This is why peaches appear in Japanese festivals and rituals. This is why peaches are given as gifts when people are sick or struggling. This is why when the demon comes, the fruit that stops it is always the peach. Izanagi reached the top of the slope. He found a great boulder, and he rolled it across the entrance to Yomi, blocking the passage between the worlds, sealing the land of the dead below and the land of the living above. Izanami came to the boulder. She stood on her side of it, in the gray light of the land of the dead, and she called to him. Through the stone, she said she would kill 1,000 people every day if he sealed the entrance. Izanagi said, "Then I will build 1,500 birthing houses every day. For every death you send, I will answer with more life." They stood on either side of the great stone and made their agreement, the agreement that has governed the world ever since. Every day, 1,000 deaths. Every day, 1,500 births. The world always slightly on the side of living. The balance never quite even, always tipped a little toward continuation. Then they said to each other the words of ending. Izanagi said, "My beloved wife, between us it is finished." Izanami said, "My beloved husband, if you do this, I will take 1,000 lives every day." And that was the end of the marriage of the gods who made Japan, the man who invites and the woman who invites, separated forever by the great stone at the slope of Yomi, one above and one below, one in the light and one in the dark, both still present in the world, but present in it differently now, in the way that every ending leaves both things still there, but changed by what has ended between them. Izanagi left the entrance to Yomi and came to a place called Awakihara, the plain of the rushing water, or perhaps the plain of purification, a place by the sea, where the water was clean, and the air was clear, and the world above was fully itself again, after the gray world below. He washed. This is the origin of misogi, the purification ritual, the washing away of what should be washed away, the cleansing of the self after contact with what contaminates. He washed the things he had worn in Yomi, and from those things as they fell into the water, more gods were born, the gods of the clothing and the adornments, the gods of the things that touch the body, and take on something of where the body has been. Then he washed himself. He dove into the sea, and from the different parts of his washing came more gods, the gods of the left eye and the right eye, the gods of the nose, the gods of the different waters, the gods born from the sea, in the place where a god cleansed himself of the contamination of death and came back to the living world. The last three gods born from Izanagi's purification were different from all the others. From his left eye as he washed it came Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, the great illuminating deity, the one who lights the world above, the way the sun lights everything it touches, equally and without favor. From his right eye as he washed it, came Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon, the reader of the moon, the one who measures the nights, and the months, and the tides. From his nose as he washed it, came Susanoo, the impetuous male, the god of storms, the god of the force that moves through the world, like wind through grass, bending everything before it, and leaving everything changed when it has passed. Izanagi looked at his 3 children. He said, "Here are 3 noble children." He gave them their assignments. He told Amaterasu to rule the high plane of heaven, Takamagahara, the sky and the light, and all the things that happen in the space above. He told Tsukuyomi to rule the realm of the night, the dark half of the world, the hours between the setting of the sun and its rising. He told Susanoo to rule the seas, the great water that surrounded the islands and connected them to the rest of the world. And then Izanagi, having washed himself, having given birth to the sun and the moon and the storm, having made his agreement with death, and sealed the entrance to the land of the dead, having done everything he had come to the world to do, became hidden. The Kojiki says he went to his palace, and he rested there. He had earned the rest. Part 4. The Storm God's Grief. Susanoo did not want to rule the seas. His father had given him this task, the vast and difficult task of governing the water that surrounded the world, the water that was always moving, always changing, the water that gave life, and also took it, that connected everything and divided everything. That was the most powerful thing in the world, and the most restless. This was the assignment, and Susanoo wept. He wept the way storms weep, which is to say he wept enormously, without restraint, his crying shaking the mountains, and drying the rivers and the seas, his grief so large that it altered the landscape, the way very large feelings sometimes alter, the places where they happen, leaving behind something of their weight in the ground and the air. Izanagi asked him why he was weeping, and Susanoo said, "I want to go to my mother. I want to go to Izanami. I want to go to the land of the dead, where she is. This is all I want. I do not want to rule the seas. I want my mother." Izanagi was furious. He had just come back from Yomi. He had sealed its entrance with a great boulder. He had made his peace with the ending of his marriage and the death of his wife, and now his son was telling him that he wanted to go there, that he was weeping for the place, that Izanagi had just fled. He banished Susanoo. He told him to leave. He told him he could not stay. in the world that Izanagi had purified, and shaped and assigned, and Susanoo, weeping still, decided that before he went, he would say goodbye to his sister. He rose toward the high plane of heaven to find Amaterasu. When Amaterasu saw him coming, she was afraid. This seemed strange at first. He was her brother. He was coming to say goodbye. But Amaterasu knew Susanoo. She knew his nature. She knew that he was the god of storms, that where he went, things were disturbed, that his presence alone was enough to change the quality of the air, the way a storm changes everything it touches, without meaning harm. She knew he was grief-stricken. She knew he was angry. She knew that all of that together made him unpredictable, that a god whose grief has been denied, and whose father has banished him, is not a god who should be trusted to come in peace. She armed herself. She put on the armor of war, the helmet and the quiver, the bow and the sword. She bit her bow until it sparked. She stood on the border of her realm, and she challenged him. Susanoo said he came in peace. He said he only wanted to say goodbye. He said he bore her no ill will. Amaterasu did not entirely believe him, but she asked him to prove it. She said, "Let us produce children together. If the children we produce are male, it will prove your heart is pure. If they are female, it will prove you came with evil intent." This is the old logic of divine testing, the idea that the nature of what you produce reflects the nature of your intention, that the world around you knows what you are, even when you try to hide it. Susanoo agreed. He asked Amaterasu for the long string of jewels she wore around her neck, the jewels that were part of her divine regalia, the things that were most essentially hers. She gave them to him. He broke the string. He bit the jewels. He breathed out, and from his breath came 5 male gods, 5 of them, born from the jewels of his sister, and the breath of the storm god, each one male, each one proof, or so Susanoo claimed, that he had come with a good heart. Amaterasu had taken the sword Susanoo wore, his 10-grasp sword, and from it she produced 3 female gods, 3 goddesses, 3 of the most important presences in Japanese religion. The 3 were Munakata no Sanjoshin, the 3 goddesses of Munakata, the goddesses of the sea crossings, and the safe passage of boats, and the commerce between islands. That has always been the commerce between people. Susanoo said, "You see, my heart was pure. The male children came from my breath. I am innocent." Amaterasu was not entirely convinced by this reasoning, but the test had been proposed and the test had been done, and the result was what it was. And then Susanoo, having been told he could stay, or at least having decided he was no longer leaving, began to behave in ways. That made everyone around him understand why Amaterasu had been afraid. He broke down the borders between the rice paddies. The rice paddies in Japan are separated by low earthen walls, channels that direct the water, boundaries that define which field belongs to which person, which water comes from which source. These borders are essential. Without them, the paddies don't work. Susanoo broke them. He filled in the ditches. He covered up the channels. He wrecked the careful system that makes rice cultivation possible, the system that has fed Japan for as long as Japan has been a place. He defiled Amaterasu's weaving hall, the weaving hall where the sacred weaving is done, where the cloth of the divine is made, the cloth that is the fabric of the world. In the same way that cloth is the fabric of a coat, the material from which the surface of things is constructed, he opened a hole in the roof of the hall, and he dropped a dead horse through it, a horse that had been flayed, its skin removed. The horse fell through the roof and onto the weaving looms, and the weavers were startled, and in their startlement, one of them injured herself on the shuttle of her loom and died. The Kojiki says this was the last thing. Amaterasu had tried to explain his behavior. She had said that the broken borders must have been done with good intentions, that he was trying to make the fields easier to use. She had said that the filled-in ditches must have been an expression of generosity, that he wanted more water to reach more places. She had tried to see his actions in the best possible light, the way a loving older sister sometimes tries to explain the behavior of a difficult younger brother. But after the horse came through the roof and the weaver died, there was nothing more to explain. Amaterasu Suichi. She went to the rock cave of heaven, Amano Iwato, the cave in the cliff face of the sky, and she pulled the great stone door closed behind her, and the world went dark. This is one of the central moments of Japanese mythology. The sun hiding, the world without light. It is not the same as night, which is the ordinary darkness, the darkness that comes every day and is expected and understood. This was the sun hiding. This was the light that makes everything possible, refusing to come out, withdrawing into the rock, taking itself away from a world that had become, through its own violence and excess, unworthy of being illuminated. With Amaterasu hidden, the world became dark. The darkness was total. The 8 million gods, the Yaoyorozu no Kami, all the gods that had been born from the great work of creation, stood in the darkness and did not know what to do. Evil spread, disasters came. Bad things happened everywhere at once, the way bad things happen when the light goes out and the darkness gives them permission to exist. The 8 million gods gathered together. They gathered on the dry riverbed of heaven, all of them, every god in the world, and they held a council to decide how to bring the sun back. Omoikane, the god of wise thought, the god whose name means the one who bears wisdom, was the one who devised the plan. He was the planner, the strategist, the one who looked at the situation and understood what was needed and organized the gods accordingly. The plan was elaborate. The plan involved everything. It involved the roosters of the long crying kind, the roosters that crowed at dawn, being gathered together and made to crow all at once. If the sun could not see the sky, she could at least hear that the dawn birds were calling. It involved a great mirror, Magatamano Kagami, hung from the branches of the sakaki tree, the evergreen sacred tree, hung with jewels and with cloth, so that it caught whatever light there was and reflected it back, so that when the sun emerged, the first thing she would see was her own reflection, brilliant and complete. It involved the jewels and the sword and the sacred things of the gods, all of them arranged in front of the cave, all of them saying in their own way that the world was ready for the sun to return. And it involved Ameno Uzume. Ameno Uzume is sometimes described as the goddess of dawn, sometimes as the goddess of revelry, sometimes as the goddess of the arts. She is the goddess of the thing that cannot be contained, the energy that comes out of you before you decide to let it, the laugh that escapes before you know you're laughing. She took the branches of the sacred tree and she held them. She overturned a tub in front of the cave and she stood on it and she began to dance. Her dance was not a formal dance. It was not the dance of ritual or ceremony. It was the dance of a god who had decided that the situation required the full force of her nature, that nothing held back would be enough, that only everything would do. She danced so freely that the things she wore fell away from her, and she danced in a state that no god had ever danced in the presence of all the other gods. And the 8 million gods laughed. This is the moment. This is the turning in the darkness of a world from which the sun has hidden in the silence of a plain, where all the gods stand worried and afraid. Ameno Uzume dances, and the gods laugh. They cannot help it. The laughter comes before the decision to laugh. It comes from somewhere deeper than where decisions come from. It comes from the body's recognition that this is funny, that this is joyful, that this is the kind of thing that makes you feel, even in the dark, even when things are terrible, that life is still life, and you are still in it. Amaterasu heard the laughter. She was in the cave. She had shut the world out. With the great stone door, she had taken herself away from the world that had become unworthy, and through the stone she heard 8 million gods laughing. She did not understand. If the world was dark, if everything had gone wrong, if she had withdrawn, and there was no light, and the bad things were spreading, why were the gods laughing? She opened the door just a crack, just enough to look. At that moment, one of the strong gods, Amenotagi, the god of powerful arms, took her hand and pulled her out, and the world was light again. The 8 million gods roared. They roared in the way that a crowd roars when the thing they were waiting for finally happens, when the moment that seemed impossible arrives. They stretched a rope of woven straw across the entrance of the cave behind Amaterasu as she emerged, so that the door could not be closed again, so that the sun was committed now, committed to the world, committed to the task of illuminating whatever came next. Susanoo was punished. His nails were pulled, his hair was cut. He was fined a great fine, the fine of 1,000 tables of tribute, and then he was expelled. He was sent out of the high plane of heaven into the world below, the world of the islands and the humans, and the things that happen in the realm between the gods and the dead. He came down to the land of Izumo, on the coast of Japan, where the clouds come in from the sea, and the rivers run to the water's edge, and the world is always half mist, half real, the kind of place where things happen that happen nowhere else. He came down weeping. He came down the way he had always done things, with his full nature, nothing held back, the grief and the energy and the force of him, all present at once. He came down to Izumo, and there, at the river, he found chopsticks floating in the current. This matters. Chopsticks floating in a river means people upstream. People upstream means a story. Susanoo followed the chopsticks upstream. Part 5. The 8-headed serpent. At the headwaters of the river, Susanoo found an old man and an old woman sitting together and weeping, with a young woman between them. He asked them who they were and why they were crying. The old man said his name was Ashinazuchi, the foot-stroking elder. The old woman said her name was Tenazuchi, the hand-stroking elder. These names carry in them something of who they were, the parents who stroke the feet and hands of the children they love, the parents for whom the body of their child is precious and known, each part of it familiar and dear. They said the young woman between them was their daughter Kushinada Hime, the wondrous Inada princess, named for the rice paddies that are the heart of Japanese life. Susanoo asked why they were weeping, and they told him. There was a serpent. Its name was Yamata no Orochi, the eight-forked serpent, the eight-headed serpent, the serpent with 8 heads and 8 tails, 8 of everything, a creature so large and so old that its body stretched across 8 valleys and 8 mountains, that moss grew on its back, as moss grows on old stones, that cedar trees grew along its spine, the way trees grow along a ridge. Its eyes were red as the winter cherry. Its belly, when you saw it from below, was always bloody, always inflamed, the belly of something that has been eating and eating for longer than anyone can remember. Every year the serpent came, every year it took one of their daughters. They had had 8 daughters, 7 were gone. Kushinada Hime was the last, and tonight was the night it would come. Susanoo looked at Kushinada Hime. The Kojiki says he found her beautiful. This is stated plainly, the way the Kojiki states many things plainly, without elaboration, as if beauty is simply a fact, to be noted and recorded, alongside the other facts. He asked the old man and old woman if they would give him their daughter, if he defeated the serpent. They said yes. They said yes immediately, without hesitation, because what parent would hesitate when someone offers to save their child? Then Susanoo transformed Kushinada Hime. He turned her into a comb and placed her in his hair. This is how the Kojiki describes it, without further explanation, in the manner of a text that has been through many tellings and has distilled each moment to its essential form. She became a comb. He wore her in his hair. She was safe there, in the most intimate place, the place closest to the mind and the intentions that live there. Then Susanoo prepared. He told the old couple to brew sake, a specific sake, a sake brewed 8 times, stronger than ordinary sake, the strongest sake that can be made, by the methods known to the people of Izumo. When the sake was ready, he told them to build a fence with 8 gates, and to place a platform behind each gate, with a tub of sake on it, and then they waited. The serpent came. It came down from the mountains, the way things that have been coming, for a long time come, without urgency, without hurry, because they have always come, and they have always gotten what they came for, and they have no reason to believe. This time will be different. It came to the fence. It found the 8 gates, and through each gate it smelled the sake. 8 heads, 8 gates, 8 tubs of sake. Each head went through its gate and lowered itself to the tub and began to drink. The sake was very strong, The sake brewed 8 times is not the sake of a feast or the sake of a ceremony. It is the sake of deep forgetting. It is the sake that reaches the place behind the eyes where decisions are made and softens that place until the decisions stop. The serpent drank, all 8 heads drank, and then all 8 heads lay down, and the great body stretched across the mountains and the valleys, and the serpent slept. Susanoo drew his sword. He cut the serpent. The text is plain about this. He drew his sword and he cut it into pieces, as you cut anything you need to cut, steadily and completely, until the work is done. The river ran red, the red river of Izumo, the river that runs red to the sea, the river that has been red in the old stories ever since this night. When he reached the serpent's tail, his sword struck something hard, something that should not be there. He looked. Inside the tail of Yamata no Orochi, wrapped in the flesh of the serpent, was a sword. This sword is one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan. Its name in the Kojiki is a Menomuraku mono Tsurugi, the sword of the gathering clouds of heaven. Later it would be called Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, and it would pass from God to human, and from human to legend, and from legend into the regalia of the Japanese emperors, where it remains today, one of 3 objects that define the right to rule. Susanoo knew he had found something extraordinary. He sent the sword to Amaterasu in the sky above. He sent it up to his sister as a gift, or perhaps as a peace offering, or perhaps simply because he understood that a thing this important belonged in the highest place. Then he built a palace. He chose the place in Izumo where he would build it, and the clouds around the place rose in a great column, and he knew this was the right place. He said, "From this place the clouds rise up high," and he made a poem, the first poem in the Kojiki, the first poem in Japanese literature. He said something that becomes, in translation, something like this: "Many-fenced palace of Izumo, where the clouds rise many-fold. To dwell there with my bride, I build a many-fenced palace. Oh, those many fences." It is a love poem. It is a poem about wanting to build walls around the person you love, to protect them, to make a place for them that is entirely theirs and yours together. And it is the first poem out of everything that has happened, out of the making of the world and the death of the Creator, and the theft of the sun, and the killing of the serpent. The first poem is a love poem. Susanoo took Kushinada Hime back from her comb shape. He turned her back into herself, and he built her a palace in Izumo, in the place where the clouds rose, and they lived there together. This is how the Kojiki understands Susanoo. He is not simply the god of storms, he is the god of what happens when force and feeling are not channeled into anything useful. The storm that wrecked the patties and threw the dead horse through the roof, that was one Susanoo, the suitor who turned his bride into a comb to keep her safe, the poet who built walls of love around the person he loved, the warrior who faced the great serpent and came out carrying a sword he had not known was there, that was another Susanoo. Both are true, both are him. This is what the Kojiki offers as an understanding of the storm. Not that it is good or that it is bad, but that it contains both, that the same force that destroys the careful arrangements can also protect the thing worth protecting, can also defeat the thing worth defeating, can also find inside the destruction something that was hidden there, something that would not have been found by any gentler means. Susanoo stayed in Izumo. He did not go back to the sky. He did not go back to his father's world. He stayed in the world below, in the land of clouds and rivers and mist, in the place where the great work of building was going to happen. He became the ancestor of the gods of Izumo, the great-great-great-grandfather of Okuninushi, the one from whose line came the god who would build the country into the place it needed to be. The storm became a foundation, not a peaceful foundation, not the foundation of order and light that Amaterasu provided in the sky above, but a foundation of force and wildness and the particular kind of creativity that comes from having nothing to lose and everything to find. Izumo is still the land of Susanoo. The great shrine of Izumo is the place where love is prayed for. It is the place where people go when they want to be found, when they want to be matched, when they want the thread that connects one person to another to be the right thread, the thread that holds. The god they pray to there is Okuninushi, but behind Okuninushi is Susanoo, the one who built the first many-fenced palace, the one who made the first poem about it, the one who understood, before anyone else, that the reason to build walls is to hold something precious inside them. Every October in the old calendar, which is Nakaya Oki in Japanese, the literal meaning of which is the month when the gods are absent, all the gods of Japan travel to Izumo. They leave their shrines, they leave the mountains and the rivers, and the crossroads and the forests where they normally live. They all go to Izumo, to the great shrine, to the place of Susanoo and Okuninushi, to sit together and decide who will be joined to whom. That is why October is the month when the gods are absent They are not gone. They are in Izumo, at the great conference of matches, deciding the threads. In Izumo itself, October is called Kamiaritsuki, the month when the gods are present, because they go there, because Izumo is where they gather, because the first many-fenced palace, built by the storm god who became a poet, is still the place where the gods do their most human work. This is the end of the age of Izanagi and Izanami, the age of the parents who made the world. What comes next is the age of their children, the age of Amaterasu in the sky, and Susanoo in Izumo, and the long story of how the world came to be the world that people live in. But for now, the world is at rest. The sun is back in the sky. The serpent is gone. The sword is with the gods. And in Izumo, on the coast where the clouds come in from the sea, a god who once wept for his mother sits in his many-fenced palace with the woman he rescued, and the poem he made, and the new life he has built from what he destroyed and what he found. The world continues. Part 6, Okuninushi and the White Rabbit. Time passed in Izumo. The children of Susanoo and Kushinada Hime grew and produced children of their own, and those children produced more children, and the generations accumulated, in the way generations accumulate, when you are a god in a place that has decided to be full of life. Each generation added to the story. Each generation left something behind, a name, a deed, a particular way of doing the thing that needed doing. The most important of them all was Okuninushi, the great landmaster, the god who would come to be, the central figure of the Izumo tradition, the god whose story fills more of the Kojiki's pages than the story of any other single being. His name tells you what he became. He became the master of the land. He became the one who organized the world below, the way Amaterasu organized the world above, the one who made the earth a place where living things could live. But before he became the great land master, he was simply one of the gods of Izumo, with brothers who resented him, and a path ahead of him that he could not yet see. The story begins with a rabbit. On the coast of Inaba, on the island that faces Izumo across the sea, there was a white rabbit. The rabbit had come from an island far out in the water, a small island, just a rock with some grass on it, and it had wanted to reach the mainland, but there was no way across. The rabbit is clever. This is understood from the beginning. Not clever in a dishonest way, but clever in the way that small creatures who live among larger ones must be clever, the cleverness of attention, of noticing what is available and using it. The rabbit had an idea. It went to the sea creatures. It went to the wani, which the Kojiki calls sea creatures, but which is sometimes translated as sharks, or as crocodiles, or simply as the great things that live in the sea, the things with teeth and size and presence. The rabbit said to them, "Let us count which of us is more numerous. Line up from this island to the mainland, and I will count you." The sea creatures, who had never been asked this question before, who had never thought about which species was more numerous, agreed. They lined themselves up from the small island to the coast of Inaba, their backs making a bridge across the water. The rabbit ran across their backs, counting as it ran. 1, 2, 3, counting the sea creatures as it crossed from island to mainland. But when it reached the last one, when it had almost made it, when the shore was right there, the rabbit made a mistake. It said, "I have crossed. You were only a bridge for me." The last sea creature heard this, and the last sea creature, furious, stripped the rabbit of its fur. This is the version in the Kojiki. The rabbit had deceived. It had used the sea creatures without their full understanding of what they were being used for, and when it gloated at the end, when it revealed the trick, it lost everything. It lay on the beach of Inaba, bare and bleeding, its skin gone, the wind and the salt, burning it. The 80 brothers of Okuninushi passed by. They were going to Inaba to court the Princess Yagamihime, all 80 of them, each one hoping to win her, each one carrying his own luggage, and giving the heaviest bags to Okuninushi, who was the youngest, who was considered the least, who was made to walk behind the rest, carrying the weight they did not want to carry. The 80 brothers passed the rabbit. They saw it lying on the shore, skinless. They had advice for it. They said, "Go to the sea and wash in the salt water, and then lie in the wind until you are dry." The rabbit did what they said. The salt burned it. The wind dried it. The skin cracked and peeled, and the pain was worse than before. Then Okuninushi came, walking behind his brothers, carrying the bags. He saw the rabbit. He asked it what had happened. The rabbit told him everything. The island and the sea creatures and the trick, and the brothers and their bad advice. Okuninushi said, "Go to the mouth of the river and wash yourself in the fresh water, then take the pollen of the rushes that grow at the water's edge and spread it on the ground and roll in it." The rabbit did this. The fresh water cooled the burning. The pollen of the rushes, soft and fine and gentle, settled on the bare skin, and something happened there, some healing, some restoration, the skin coming back, the fur returning, the rabbit becoming itself again. The rabbit looked at Okuninushi, and it said, "Those 80 brothers will not win the princess. You will win her, you who have been made to carry the weight, you who stopped to help." The rabbit of Inaba is sometimes called a god. Sometimes it is called a disguise, a test in the form of an animal, the divine taking on the shape of a small creature, to see who would stop and who would walk past. What it said came true. Yagami Hime chose Okuninushi, not the brothers with their confidence, and their sharp advice and their light loads. The youngest one, the one who had been carrying everything, and had still stopped when he saw something suffering. The 80 brothers did not accept this quietly. They tried to kill Okuninushi twice. The first time they told him there was a wild boar trapped in a mountain, and that he should catch it, and they rolled a great heated stone down the mountain at him, and he died. But his mother went to the heavens, and she appealed to the god of shells and the god of clams, and the god of shells ground herself to a powder, and the god of clams mixed the powder with water, and together they restored Okuninushi, covering his body with what they had made, filling in the death with something that was not death, until he was alive again. The second time the 80 brothers tricked him again into a hollow tree, and they wedged him in there with a wedge of wood, and he died again, and again he was revived, this time by his mother sending him away, sending him to the place she knew he needed to go, the place where the real test was waiting. She sent him to Susanoo. She sent him to the storm god's realm, the realm called Nenokuni, the root country, the deep country, the country beneath the world, where the roots of things go, when the surface of the world is not enough to hold them. Okuninushi went to Nenokuni. He arrived at Susanoo's palace, and he saw Susanoo, the daughter of Susanoo, and she saw him, and the Kojiki says that their eyes met, and they decided everything. In that moment, the way eyes sometimes meet, and the decision is made before the words are spoken. Susanoo went to her father and told him that a wonderful god had arrived. Susanoo said, "That is Okuninushi." He knew. He had always known. Okuninushi was of his lineage. He was the great descendant. He was the one who was supposed to come here and prove himself. Susanoo gave him a room to sleep in. The room was full of snakes. Okuninushi went to sleep. Susanoo had given him a scarf, a snake-repelling scarf, and he waved it at the snakes, and the snakes were calm, and he slept through the night. The next night, Susanoo gave him a room full of centipedes and wasps. Okuninushi had a centipede and wasp repelling scarf, and he waved it and slept. The night after that, Susanoo shot an arrow into a great field and told Okuninushi to fetch it. When Okuninushi was in the field looking for the arrow, Susanoo set the field on fire. The fire surrounded him. The flames were coming from all sides, and then a mouse appeared. The mouse said, "The inside is hollow, hollow. The outside is narrow, narrow." Okuninushi understood. He stamped the ground, and it opened, and he fell through into the hollow below, and the fire passed over him. The mouse brought him the arrow. When Okuninushi came back with the arrow, Susanoo was asleep. Okuninushi looked at the sleeping storm god. He looked at the hair, the great mass of hair of the god of storms, and he tied it to the rafters of the palace, all of it, tied it carefully and completely to every rafter, so that when Susanoo woke and tried to move, his hair would hold him. Then he took the sword and the bow and the arrows and the speaking lute of Susanoo, and he took Suseribime on his back, and he ran. As he ran, the speaking lute brushed against a tree, and the tree rang out, and the sound woke Susanoo. He tried to rise. His hair pulled at the rafters. The palace shook. By the time he had freed himself, Okuninushi was gone. Susanoo came to the border of Nenokuni and called after him. He called, "Use the sword and the bow and arrows I gave you to drive back your brothers, and marry Suseribime as your main wife, and become the great land master." This is how it goes in the Kojiki. The test becomes the blessing. The challenge becomes the gift. Susanoo had put Okuninushi through every trial he could devise, and Okuninushi had passed every one, had survived the snakes and the centipedes and the fire, and had even found the cleverness to escape. And now Susanoo was telling him to go and become the thing he was supposed to become. Okuninushi returned to the world above. He drove away his 80 brothers. He took Suseribime as his wife. He built a palace in Izumo, and he began the great work that was waiting for him. Part 7. Building the Land. Okuninushi did not build the land alone. This is one of the things the Kojiki understands, that later stories sometimes forget. The great works are not done alone. The great works require helpers, companions, the small god who appears at the right moment, with the knowledge you did not know you needed. Okuninushi was standing on the shore of Izumo, looking out at the sea, when he saw something coming across the water. It was very small. It was floating in something, a vessel made of a pod, a small pod like the pod of a gourd, split in half and dried, sealed with the wings of a moth. To make it watertight, it floated toward him across the dark sea. Inside was a very small god, a god so small that Okuninushi could not recognize it. Its name was unknown to him. None of the gods he consulted knew it either. Then a toad spoke up. The toad said, "Ask Quebiko. Quebiko knows everything." Quebiko is the scarecrow in the mountain field, the figure that stands in the field to keep the birds away, the one who stands still and watches everything, the one who never moves and therefore sees every single thing that moves around it. Quebiko knew who the small god was. Quebiko said, "That is Sukunabikona, the god of small things, the child of Kamimusubi." Okuninushi and Sukunabikona worked together. Sukunabikona was small, but he knew medicine. He knew the medicine of the gods, and the medicine of the body, and the medicine of the land. He knew how to make the land fertile, how to make the soil produce, how to turn the ground into something that could feed the living things that lived on it. Together they built the country, not the islands, which were already there, but the country as it works, the fields and the medicines and the ways of keeping things alive in a world that is always trying to let things die. They worked for a long time. They worked through seasons, through the changes of the sky, through the things that come and the things that go. And then Sukunabikona climbed a stalk of millet and was flung away to the land of Tokoyo, the eternal land, the land beyond the horizon, where things go when they are done with this world, but not yet ready to be nowhere. Okuninushi stood alone again and said, "How shall I build this country alone?" And a light appeared on the sea. A god came to him across the water, a shining god, a god who said, "I am your spirit. I am the spirit of your good fortune. I am the one who makes you, more than you would be without me." This god said, "Enshrine me properly, and I will help you complete the work." The god was called Umononushi, the great master of things, and Okuninushi built him a shrine on the mountain of Miwa in the land of Yamato, a shrine that stands there still, that has stood there since before history was written, since before the word shrine existed to describe what it was. With Umononushi enshrined, Okuninushi continued. He built more than the land. He built the way of living on the land. He built the means by which the people who would come after would be able to stay alive in the world that had been made for them. The Kojiki says he established the methods of farming and fishing, the ways of treating illness, the charms and the practices that protected people from the things that threatened them. He learned from Sukunabikona and from Umononushi, and from the trials he had survived, and from the love of Suseribime, and from the rabbit on the beach. who had told him, before he even knew it was true, that he was the one. He became Okuninushi, the great landmaster, not because he was given the title, but because he earned it, because the country that had been a chaos of competing gods and violent brothers and dangerous trials became, under his care, a place that worked. The world below was built, Ashihara no Nakatsukuni, the middle country of the reed plains, the world between the high sky of Amaterasu and the deep roots of Nenokuni, was ready. And then the sky noticed. Amaterasu looked down from Takamagahara and saw the land that had been built. She said, "The middle country of the reed plains is full of light." She said it as you say something, when you realize that a thing you are going to do needs to be done now, that the situation has arrived at the point where waiting is no longer possible. She said, "That country should be ruled by my child." She had a child, Ameno Oshihomimi, and this child was the one she intended to send, but things are rarely that simple. Ameno Oshihomimi stood at the floating bridge of heaven and looked down at the world below and said, "The country is very noisy." He was not wrong. The world below was full of gods, and the gods were not entirely quiet, and the noise of the world below was considerable. He said he did not want to go. So a different messenger was sent first, then another, then another. Some of them forgot their mission. Some of them joined the world below and did not come back. Some of them were defeated by the world they were supposed to pacify. The world below was stubborn. It had been built by gods who were not gods of heaven, and the gods of heaven were finding that the act of taking it over was not as simple as declaring that it should be taken over. Eventually, 2 gods were sent who were suited to the task. They were sent with a mission that was, at its heart, a negotiation. They went to Okuninushi, and they asked him, not ordered him, not conquered him, but asked him, "Will you hand over the land?" This is the moment, called Kuniuzuri in Japanese. The giving of the land, the negotiated transfer of the world below from the gods who had built it to the gods who had been born to rule it. It was not entirely peaceful. Some of Okuninushi's children resisted. One of them refused outright. The negotiations were long, and there were more than one of them, but in the end, Okuninushi said yes. He said, "If you build me a shrine as tall as the high plane of heaven, with pillars as thick and deep as the earth, a shrine that is as grand as the world I have built for you, I will hand over the land." This is what it takes, not force, not war, recognition, the acknowledgement that the one who built the world deserves a place in it, even after he is no longer the one who rules it. The shrine was built. It was built at Izumo, the place where the clouds rise, the place where Susanoo had made his poem, the place where the great work had begun. The Izumo Grand Shrine stands there now. It is one of the most sacred places in Japan. Millions of people visit it. They go there to pray for love and marriage, because Okuninushi became the god of those things, because the god who was carried by the love of Susarabi May and the wisdom of the white rabbit and the mercy of the mouse in the field, became the god of all the kinds of love that make life worth the living. Okuninushi withdrew. He went to the inner sanctuary of his shrine. He went behind the great pillars. He went to the place that was built for him, and he is there still, in the old understanding, in the tradition that says that the gods do not disappear, but become present in different ways, that what withdraws from the visible world remains in the invisible one, present in the places that were made for them, available to those who come to ask. The land was clear. The world below was ready. Now there was nothing standing between the gods of heaven and the country they had decided to govern. Part 8. The Descent of Ninigi. Amaterasu called her grandson. The plan had changed. Ameno Oshihomimi, her original choice, had a son now. His name was Ninigi, and Ninigi was the one who would go down to the world below. Amaterasu gathered everything he would need. She gave him the 3 sacred treasures. The first was Yasakani no Magatama, the curved jewel of 8 feet, the jewel that hangs at the center of every sacred ritual, the jewel whose shape is the shape of the soul, the curved kama shape that appears in Japanese art wherever the deepest things are being indicated. The second was the mirror, Magatama no Kagami, the mirror that had been hung in the sakaki tree when the gods needed to lure Amaterasu out of the rock cave. Amaterasu held the mirror and looked at it and said, "When you look into this mirror, you are looking at me. This mirror is me. Honor it as you would honor me." The third was Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, the sword that Susanoo had found in the tale of Yamata no Orochi, and sent to her, the sword that had passed from the serpent to the god of storms, to the goddess of the sun, and would now pass to the god who was going to govern the land below. These 3 things together, the jewel and the mirror and the sword, are the imperial regalia of Japan. They are the objects that define the right to rule. They are present today, or believed to be present, in specific shrines, specific places held in the dark behind closed doors that are not opened, kept in the old way, the way of a tradition that understands that some things are more powerful when they are not seen. Ninigi was given companions. There were 5 gods who went with him, gods who would become the ancestors of the great clans of Japan, the families that would manage the rituals and the prayers and the sacred music and the mirror and the jewels and all the things that the divine relationship between the sky and the land required for its maintenance. Ameno Koyane and Hutodama, who had arranged the ritual of the rock cave. Ameno Uzume, who had danced. Ishikoridome, who had made the mirror. Tamanuya, who had made the jewels. These 5 went down with Ninigi. Their descendants would serve the imperial house for as long as the imperial house existed, each family keeping its particular part of the inheritance intact, generation after generation, the unbroken chain of service. That is one of the things Japan means when Japan talks about continuity. And with these 5 came 800 myriads of gods. 800 myriads is a way of saying all of them, every god there was, all the presences that had been born, from the great work of creation, all the spirits that had accumulated over the long age of the gods, they all went. Ninigi descended. He descended through the 8-fold clouds, pushing them apart, as you push apart something that is in the way of where you need to go. He descended through the heavenly path, through the space between the sky and the land, through the air that separates the world of the divine from the world that the divine was descending into. He landed at the peak of Takachiho, in the land of Hyuga, in what is now called Miyazaki, on the southern island of Kyushu. He landed on the floating peak, the peak that seems to float above the clouds, the mountain so high that when you are at its top, the clouds are below you, and the sky is very close, and the distance between where you are and where you came from is smaller than it seems. He said, "This is a splendid place." He said, "Here I will make my palace." And he did. He built his palace at Takachiho, and he ruled the land below, as he had been sent to rule it. But before he entered his palace, something happened on the way. There was a god at the crossroads, where the road from heaven meets the road of the land, a god standing there with a light so bright that it illuminated everything, above the sky and below the sea, and all the world between. Ameno Uzume was sent to ask who this was. She was sent because she was the one who had danced without fear, because she was the one who had stood at the entrance of the cave and refused to be diminished by what was large and dangerous, because she was the one who could face a stranger with the full force of her presence and ask what she needed to ask. She went to the crossroads. She asked the bright god who he was. He said his name was Sarutahiko, the earth god, the god of the roads, the god of the pathways, and the crossings, and the places where one way meets another. He said he had come to serve as a guide. He had heard that a heavenly god was descending, and he had come to light the way. Amenosume guided Ninigi to Sarutahiko. Sarutahiko led Ninigi down the road to Takachiho. Afterward, Ameno-Uzume accompanied Sarutahiko to the land of Issei, where he would take up his permanent station, the place that is still his. This is why Ameno-Uzume is the ancestor of the Sarume clan, the clan of performers, the clan that kept alive the tradition of the dance that brought the sun back from the cave. This is how the Kojiki keeps track of origins. Every story is also an explanation. Every event that happened in the age of the gods left something behind in the world of humans, a practice, a place, a family, a way of doing things. That points back, if you follow it, to the moment it began. Ninigi settled at Takachiho, and one day he saw a woman. Her name was Konohana no Sakuyabime, the princess who makes the flowers of the trees to bloom, the goddess of the flowering, the goddess of the brief and brilliant beauty of things that come into being and then pass. She was the daughter of Ohyamatsumi, the great mountain master, the god of the mountains, who had been born from the killing of Kagutsuchi, who had been present in the world since the earliest days of its making. Ninigi asked her to marry him. Oyamatsumi was delighted. He sent both of his daughters, Konohana no Sakuyabime, who was beautiful, and Iwanagahime, who was not beautiful, whose name means the Long Rock Princess, the goddess of permanence, of the things that endure. Ninigi sent Iwanagahime back. He kept only Konohana no Sakuyabime. Oyamatsumi was sad when Iwanagahime returned. He said, "I sent both daughters so that the lives of the heavenly grandchildren would be as enduring as the rock and as blooming as the flowers of the trees. I sent both of them so that their lives would be long and full. But because Iwanagahime has been returned, the lives of the heavenly grandchildren will be like the flowers, beautiful, brief." This is why the emperors of Japan are mortal. This is the explanation the Kojiki offers for the one thing that seemed hardest to explain, the thing that required explaining more than anything else, the fact that the descendants of the gods die. They die because their ancestor, chose beauty over permanence. He chose the flowering over the rock, and from that choice, the brevity of human life followed, the way all the most important things follow, from a single decision that seemed small at the time. Ninigi and Konohana no Sakuyabime had children. Their children had children, and those children became the direct ancestors of Jimmu, the first human emperor of Japan, the beginning of the imperial line that has continued from that descent at Takachiho to the present day. But before Jimmu, there were two more generations. The next story belongs to Hawori, who is also called Yamasachibiko, the Mountain Luck Prince, and his brother Umisachibiko, the Sea Luck Prince. Two brothers, two kinds of luck, two ways of understanding the world, and between them the story of how the sea and the land were reconciled, and how the divine bloodline took on the last of what it needed before it became at last the bloodline of the first emperor. Part 9, Yamasachibiko and the Lost Hook. There is a rule in the old stories that brothers understand themselves through their differences. Umisachibiko was the Sea Luck Prince. His luck was in the sea. His tools were the fish hook and the line, and the knowledge of where the fish were, and the patience to wait for them. He went out on the water, and the water gave him what he asked for, not always immediately, not always easily, but eventually, reliably, the sea came through. Yamasachibiko was the Mountain Luck Prince. His luck was in the mountains. His tools were the bow and the arrows, and the knowledge of where the animals moved, and the stillness to wait for them. He went up into the hills, and the hills gave him what he asked for, not always immediately, not always easily, but eventually, reliably, the mountain came through. Each of them had his world. Each world provided. Neither brother had reason to want the other's world, and yet Yamasachibiko asked his brother if they could exchange tools for a day. He wanted to know what the sea felt like. He wanted to know how the water moved, and how it felt to wait for fish rather than game. Umisachibiko was reluctant. The Kojiki says he refused several times before agreeing. This is important. The reluctance matters. The tools were not just tools. They were the particular luck of each brother, and luck is not something you lend casually. But eventually Umisachibiko agreed, and Yamasachibiko took the fish hook and the line and went to the sea. He caught nothing. He sat there all day, and nothing came to his line. The sea knew he was the wrong person. The sea luck was not his luck. The fish did not come. And then he lost the hook. He lost it in the sea, somehow, in the water, the borrowed hook gone. the thing that was not his to lose, lost in the place that was not his to fish. He went back to his brother without the hook. He made a new hook. He made 1,000 new hooks from his own sword. He offered them all. Umisachibiko said no. He wanted his hook, only his hook, not a new hook, not 1,000 hooks, that hook. Yamasachibiko stood at the edge of the sea and wept. He was there, weeping at the water's edge, when an old man appeared. The old man was the god of the sea approaches, Shiotsuchi no Kami, and he asked the mountain prince, what was wrong? Yamasachibiko hanashimashita. The hook, the sea, the brother, the refusal. The old man made a small boat, a boat woven of bamboo, sealed tight, and he put Yamasachibiko in it. And he told him where to go. He said, at the end of your journey you will come to a palace. The palace is the palace of Watatsumi, the sea god. At the top of the gate there is a cassia tree. Climb the tree and wait. The daughter of the sea god will find you. Yamasachibiko got in the boat. The boat carried him down, not across the sea, but down into the sea, to the place below the water where the sea god's palace stands. He arrived. He climbed the cassia tree at the gate. He waited. A woman came from the palace to draw water from the well beneath the tree. She looked up. She saw him. She went back to her father and told him. There was someone in the tree. Watatsumi came out. He looked up at the young man, sitting in the cassia tree above his gate. He invited him in. Inside the sea god's palace, Yamasachibiko met Toyota Mabime, the jewel-rich princess, the daughter of Watatsumi. They looked at each other across the great hall of the underwater palace, and the decision was made before either of them spoke. They were married. They lived together in the palace of the sea god for 3 years, 3 years under the water, in the place where the sea god lived, with all his court and all his fish, and all the things that belonged to the deep. But Yamasachibiko remembered the hook. He had been there 3 years, and the hook had not left his mind. He had tried to let it go. He had lived well and been happy, and loved Toyota Mabime, but the hook was there, the thing he had lost. That was not his to lose. He told Toyota Mabime he was sad. He told her about the hook. She told her father. Watatsumi gathered all the fish of the sea together. He asked them, "Is anyone carrying a hook?" The fish said, "The Red Sea bream has had a sore in its throat for some time and cannot eat properly. Perhaps that is the hook." Watatsumi had the Red Sea bream brought forward and examined, and inside its throat was the hook. Watatsumi gave Yamasachibiko the hook. He also gave him 2 jewels, the tide-controlling jewels, one that makes the tide come in, and one that makes it go out, the jewels that are the master switch of all the water in the world. He said, "When you give your brother the hook, give it to him with these words. Tell him this hook is a poor hook, an unhappy hook, a hook that wants to sink. And when your brother struggles, use the tide-rising jewel to drown him. When he begs for mercy, use the tide-ebbing jewel to save him." Yamasachibiko returned to the surface. Toyota Mabime sent a message with him. She said she was pregnant, and when the time came, she would come to the shore to give birth. She said he must not look at her when she was giving birth. She said the same thing that Izanami had said in Yomi, the old prohibition, the old understanding, that there are forms that should not be witnessed by the ones who love them. Yamasachibiko returned to the land. He gave his brother the hook. He said the words he had been taught. Umisachibiko struggled in the way that people struggle when the things they relied on stop working. The tide rose against him. He begged for mercy. The tide ebbed. He submitted. He said, "I will be the guard of your person, forever and always, day and night." And so the Sea Luck Prince, who had been the older and the prouder, became the servant of the Mountain Luck Prince, and the reason the Emperor's guards perform the ceremonies they perform, the reason they make the gestures they make, the reason the imperial attendants have always acted as they act, is traced back to this moment, to Umisachibiko saying, "I will serve you, for as long as serving is required." When the time came, Toyota Mabime came to shore. She had built a parturition house at the edge of the water, and she came to it, and she told Yamasachibiko not to look. He looked. He could not help it. He is like his ancestor in this. He is like Izanagi and Yomi, like the man who could not keep from knowing what he had promised not to know. He looked, and he saw Toyota Mabime in her true form, her sea form, the form she wore when she was entirely herself, and not the form she wore for the land. She was a great crocodile, a great sea creature, the truth of what she was, when she was not accommodating, the world above the water. She gave birth to the child. Then she saw that she had been seen. She was ashamed, not because her form was wrong, because she had asked, and he had looked anyway, because the same thing had happened. That always happens in these stories. The thing you ask not to be seen. Being seen, the privacy you ask for. Being broken, the form you wear for love. Being insufficient, in the end, to hold the relationship against the pull of wanting to know. She walled up the passage between the sea and the land. She went back to the sea. She was gone. But she sent her sister, Tamayori-bime, to nurse the child, and the child grew. The child's name was Ugaya-hukiaizu, a name so long and specific that it sounds like a description rather than a name, the name of someone who was being carefully placed in the exact moment of their beginning. Ugaya Hukiaizu grew up, being nursed by his aunt, the sister of the mother who could not stay. He married his aunt. This is how the old genealogies work. The categories are different. The relationships are structured around different rules. And from this marriage came 4 sons. The 4th son was Zinmu. Zinmu, the name means divine valor, the name given to the first human emperor of Japan by the tradition that came after him, looking back at the beginning and deciding what to call it. Zinmu looked east. He stood at the tip of Kyushu, where his grandfather Ninigi had landed, where the descendants of the gods had been living, since the sky had been willing to give the land its air, and he looked east. He said, "I want to go to the east. I want to reach the center of the world. I want to go to the place from which everything can be governed, and from that place govern everything." He gathered his brothers. He told them his plan. He said, "The divine ancestors came from the sky and built this world, and now it is time to complete what they began, to go east, to find the center, to build what needs to be built." And so Zinmu began his eastern campaign. The Kojiki follows him through battle after battle, through the obstacles and the divine help, through the crow that guided him, the divine 8-legged crow Yatagarasu that appeared in the sky above him when he was lost in the mountains and led him forward. The crow with 3 legs, the sun crow, the crow that is the symbol of the sun and its guidance that appears in Japan wherever guidance is needed, wherever the path is unclear and something needs to show the way. Zinmu followed the crow. He fought the gods who would not submit. He received dreams and visions that told him what to do and what not to do. He was helped by his divine ancestors, who had never quite left the world they had made, who were still present in it, still available, still willing to send a crow, or a sword, or a dream, when one was needed. And then Zinmu arrived in Yamato. He subdued the land. He built a palace. He established the first human rulership of the land that had been made by the gods who had come before him, the land whose islands had been born from the salt that dripped from a jeweled spear, whose mountains were inhabited by spirits that had been there since the mountains were made whose rivers were the same rivers that the gods of rivers had been governing since water was first called water. He built his palace and he ruled, and the Kojiki, having brought him to this moment, having traced the unbroken line from the first stirring of the universe to the first human emperor, pauses here, not ends, pauses, because the story continues. The Kojiki continues through the emperors, through the generations of human rulership, through the stories and the battles and the poems of the long age of the early emperors. But this is the pivot point. This is where the age of the gods gives way to the age of the emperors. What comes before Zenmu is myth. What comes after Zenmu is history. Or at least, history as the old understanding imagines it, the stories that connect the divine to the human, the sky to the earth, the age when gods walked the world openly, to the age when gods became hidden and the world was left to those who had inherited it. This is the Kojiki, the record of ancient matters, written in 712 of the Common Era by Onoyasumaro, who set down what Hiranoware remembered, who had carried the stories, in memory alone, since the Emperor Tenmu had ordered the old records to be preserved. It is the oldest surviving literary work in Japan, not the oldest writing, not the oldest record, but the oldest work, the first thing that can be called a book, assembled from what had been spoken before it was written, from the oral tradition that had kept the stories alive through the generations before there were characters to write them in. The people who first told these stories did not have a writing system. They told the stories to their children, and their children told them to their children, and somewhere in the long chain of telling and listening, the stories changed and were shaped and became the versions that were finally written down. We are at the end of that chain. These are the old stories, the stories of the age before history, the stories that explain why the world is the way it is, why the mountain has the name it has, why the shrine stands where it stands, why the emperor's guards make the gestures they make, why the peach keeps evil away, why the cherry blossoms fall, why the dragonfly is the symbol of Japan. These are the stories that the people who lived in the old world told themselves, about where they came from, and why they were here, and what the world around them was trying to tell them. The sky is still up there. The earth is still below. The mountains still have gods in them. The rivers still run. The stories are still true, in the way that old stories are true, not factually but essentially, not as history but as understanding, as the shape of how a people sees itself in the world that it inhabits. Rest now. The world was made. It is still being made. You are part of it, the part that is alive right now, in this moment, in the long story that has been going on since the egg cracked open, and what was above rose, and what was below sank, and in the space between, something came into being that had not existed before. The world continues, as it always has. Part 10, What the Stories Leave Behind. Every story leaves something behind. Not always what you expect, not always what the story seems to be about. Sometimes the thing that lasts is something small, a detail, a name, a gesture that survived because it was embedded in the larger story, and so was carried forward along with everything else. The Kojiki is full of these small survivals. The peach tree at the entrance to Yomi is still known as the tree that drives away evil. Peaches are still given as gifts when protection is needed. The story explains why. The practice precedes the explanation. Both are true simultaneously. The mirror that was hung in the sakaki tree is still at the heart of the most sacred shrine in Japan. It is kept in a box inside another box, inside a building that is never opened. No one alive has seen it. In the living memory of scholarship, it may be a mirror. It may be something else. The point is that it is there, held in the dark, the way certain things must be held, the way the most important things are sometimes the most invisible. The sword from the tale of Yamata no Orochi is at a shrine in Nagoya, and also at the shrine of Issei. Depending on which tradition you follow, the sword has traveled. The sword has a history, longer than the history of the country. That keeps it. The three treasures together have been present at every enthronement of the Japanese emperor since Jimmu. More than 125 generations, more than 2,000 years by the traditional counting. Each emperor has been enthroned in the presence of the same objects that Amaterasu gave to Ninigi when she sent him down from the sky. The mirror that is Amaterasu herself, the jewel that is the soul's shape, the sword that was found in the body of the serpent. Whatever else you say about the Kojiki, whatever questions you have about its historical accuracy or its relationship to what actually happened, this is undeniably true. These three objects are still here, still present, still at the center of the ceremony. That makes the emperor the emperor. The story is still going. Think about what was made. In the beginning, there was the egg. The egg cracked. The sky rose and the earth sank. The first gods came into being. Then two of them were sent to the floating bridge. They had a spear. They stirred the sea. The first island formed from the dripping brine. They walked around the pillar. They spoke the words. The islands were born. The gods were born. The world was filled. Then Izanami died, and Izanagi went to find her, and came back changed, came back carrying in his body the sun and the moon and the storm. The storm went to heaven, and wrecked the patties and the weaving hall, and the sun hid in the cave, and 8 million gods stood in the dark, and did not know what to do. Then a goddess danced. She danced without restraint. She danced with her full nature on display, and the gods laughed, and the sun came out of the cave. Then the storm god was cast out. He went to Izumo. He found the old couple and their daughter. He fought the serpent. He found the sword. He made a palace. He made the first poem. Then Okuninushi built the land. He was helped by the small god in the gourd pod. He was helped by the mouse in the field. He was helped by the white rabbit on the beach, who saw him before he saw himself. He built and built, and the land became the land. Then the gods of heaven came down. Ninigi descended through the clouds. He brought the mirror and the jewel and the sword. He landed at the mountain. He married the daughter of the mountain god. He chose the bloom over the rock. His grandson found a lost hook at the bottom of the sea. His great-great-great-grandson went east. The crow led him. He arrived in Yamato. He built his palace. He became the first emperor. This is what the Kojiki is. It is the story of how everything got from nowhere to here. The nowhere of the egg, the here of the palace at Yamato, the long, slow journey from one to the other, passing through all the things that had to happen for the destination to be possible. The egg had to crack. The spear had to stir the sea. Izanagi had to go to Yomi and come back and wash himself in the sea. Susanoo had to behave badly and be cast out and find the serpent and kill it and find the sword. Okuninushi had to help the rabbit and survive the fire and negotiate the giving of the land. Ninigi had to choose this particular mountain and make this particular family. All of it, every part of it. Nothing could have been skipped, or the destination would have been different, or the destination would not have been reached at all. Japan, in the Kojiki's understanding, is not an accident. It is the result of an intention that was present before the world began. the intention of Amanomanakanushi, who existed first, at the center of everything, before anything else, whose name is the name of that intention. And the intention was not just to make some islands. The intention was to make a place where certain things could happen, where the rice paddies could be tended, and the silk could be woven, and the fish could be caught, and the prayers could be said, and the mirror could be kept in the dark, and the peach could keep the evil away, a place where the stories could be told. The Kojiki ends as all the best things end, not with a conclusion, but with a continuation. The story of the emperors goes on. The story of the country goes on. The gods do not disappear. They become embedded in the landscape, in the shrines and the mountains and the rivers, in the practices that survive long after their origin is forgotten, in the shapes we make and the words we say, and the things we do without knowing why, that point back, if you follow them, to the moment in the story when they began. The white rabbit is somewhere on the beach of Inaba. The peach tree is somewhere at the slope of Yomi. The first poem is still being written in Izumo. Every time someone builds a wall around the person they love. The world was made. It is still being made. Every generation adds its part. Every person who comes into the world and does the work that is theirs to do is part of the continuation of what started when the egg cracked and the sky rose and the first gods came into being in the space between. Sleep now, the world is quiet, the rivers are running, the mountains are still, the peach tree is at the border of where you are and where you are going. Outside somewhere, there is a sky, and in that sky, there are stars. Some of those stars have names. The names are old. The names came from people who looked at the same stars you would see if you looked up now and found in them the shapes of the things they most needed to believe. The summer stars include Amaterasu's light, reflected down through all the miles of dark air to where you are, not metaphorically, literally, the sun, whose light you see every day, is the descendant, in the old understanding, of the goddess who hid in the rock cave and was coaxed out by laughter. Every morning is her emergence. Every day is her agreement to keep illuminating the world. That asked her back. The world is old. The stories are older than the writing. The writing is older than almost anything else. That survives. And you are at the far end of the chain, lying somewhere in the night, carrying everything that came before you, without knowing most of it, the way everyone carries everything, without knowing most of it. The egg cracked. The world began. The story ran from there to here. Here is where you are. rest. The world continues